Hello, Internet. It is I, the Eternian King. Let me put the crown on. Yeah, there we go. Like me better with the crown? With the crown or no crown? What do you think? Let me know. I'll put the crown on for a while. So I wanted to do a video about something that I put together recently, and it is this this chart, of which I refer to as the chart of the timeline of the most awesome movies ever made. Okay, and kind of hard to describe what this chart is based on, but it's basically compiled on my movie collection. Now, I've probably seen, I'll exaggerate, I've seen every movie ever made. I've probably had in my collection over 1,000 or 2,000 movies, and over time I've gotten rid of a lot of those movies, and I've kept a few hundred, maybe 200 or 300 movies I keep in my collection for good reason. And then there's a number of movies that are in this list based on what I saw when I was a kid that I don't necessarily watch anymore. But this chart is sort of based on all the best movies ever that are important or memorable and not degenerate in a huge way. And I don't need to go on about that too much. So I've got my He-Man sword with me, and I made this chart, and I wanted to go through it at least for my own sake, and anyone who wanted to look at this and help me try and figure out what's going on. And I don't really want to discuss all the great movies that are in this list, because I don't want to get into any argument with anyone over, well, why isn't this movie or not this movie or whatever. I imagine that over time, if you collected all the great movies that you thought were amazing, you would have a chart similar to this. And I want to look into this chart a little bit. So you'll notice that, well, right about here in the 60s, this is when color came in, and you get movies like James Bond and Peter Sellers with the Pink Panther, and a number of great movies in there. And everything before that is basically black and white, and old hat Jews running Hollywood. Nobody cares. I mean, there's a few blips in there. When the American movie scene comes into play, and when the German movie scene comes around, and we don't need to talk about what the Germans did with their movies, but I want to sort of look at this chart and understand some of the ups and downs, and I'd also make a point that this chart does not go past the year 2000, because as far as I'm concerned, there's not much to consider in the year 2000 and beyond, because basically this is when, like, there's a few Lord of the Rings movies that are kind of gay, and there's Johnny Depp in the Pirates of the Caribbean with like way too much eyeshadow on, also kind of gay, and then you get into like the Marvel movies. Basically, the Disney Incorporated takes over, and everything becomes political after that. So I don't really want to get into the 2000s. Plus, a lot of the movies that I like from the 2000s are because of actors and people who were making movies before that time. So so here's this chart, okay? I'll make a few mentions. So in the 50s, you get some stuff like Godzilla and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Sort of makes a little blip there in 1954. I even threw in Teenage Caveman, which was like a Roger Corman movie that I think is interesting. But, the 50s, not that important, At the end of the 50s, there's also a TV series of Rawhide, which I really like. And I considered TV series in this graph, although it doesn't necessarily show on the graph. This is all the awesomeness. And it really peaks, as I say, once you get into the color world of movies, okay? So you get into the 60s and you have, really, really intense movies, musical stuff like The Music Man was one. Who was that, like, is that Dick Van Dyke or whatever? Those kind of characters come into play. And Mad, 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 Mad World, and, some interesting movies, Jason and the Argonauts, and I think there was some Ray Harryhausen stuff. Now, there's a little blip here where it just sort of goes down, and that's right when Walt Disney died. Take that into consideration. I try and understand that little drop. There's a drop right going into the year 1970, and I don't really understand this. I tried to understand why, but the only person I've ever heard talk about it was George Lucas, who in one of his documentaries said that in the early 70s there was a real lull in the movie industry, and he said that the big movie producers, the big movie houses were getting into real estate, or they were selling their assets to commercial interests, and they didn't know what they were doing. And along comes American Zoetrope, and right there is a jump in 1971, and that's when you have THX, and like I say, George Lucas comes on the scene, and the American Zoetrope. 71 is also when Bruce Lee came into the big scene, and so you see movies becoming interesting in the 70s. I'm sort of scrolling through my list to see if I would mention any particular interesting stuff. The 70s also gave us, like, Woody Allen starts to come along, and some fun movies. I think I threw Night of the Lepus in there, and Silent Running is a great movie, and some of the Charlton Heston stuff like Soylent Green is in there. The Wicker Man is in there. That was about the end of the Hammer Pictures run, and there's a great sort of mountainous climb into the great movies that most people know. I could certainly go on mentioning some of the movies that are on my list. I don't want to talk about specifically what's in the list, but I wanted to look at some of the drops and what's going on and why is that? What's happening? So right in 78, I had a big question in my head, like, why is there a drop in 78? And I looked, about the only thing I could come up with is that this is when Roman Polanski got thrown in jail for having, like, coke parties with Robert De Niro and Jack Nicholson, and apparently he raped a 13-year-old girl, and it seems to be something of a thread in Hollywood of abuses, and you take a bunch of artsy people and you give them a whole bunch of money and people go crazy. So I don't know if that's what the drop at 78 is all about, and I don't know what the drop in 1980 is, because certainly the 80s is what you might think of the great peak of creative explosion. And right at 1980, I can't understand the drop, but 79 and 81 are really, really good years, so maybe that explains what that drop's all about. There's a great peak in 84. I decided all the best movies seem to come out of 84. Like, you certainly have, I threw in, like, the Ewok movies and some Star Trek's in there. Terminator came out. There's a bunch of things, like the Robotech movie happened. Ghostbusters, Cannonball Run 2, I even threw in there. The Neverending Story is in there. Looking at my list, bunch of stuff. Great movies. Starman, Supergirl is in there. A lot of good movies in 1984. And then there's a drop right in, like, '87, and I got to tell you, I got a theory about this. Take it or leave it. Even though there's not a lot of Canon Pictures movies in my list, right in '87 is when Canon Pictures declared bankruptcy while they were making the Masters of the Universe movie, and I am the Eternian King, so I care about Masters of the Universe. And whatever happened, they had Gary Goodard trying his hardest to make a He-Man movie. That's not what a lot of He-Man people wanted. It's about as good as Suburban Commando. I don't think Suburban Commando's in my list. But the point being, for whatever reason, something happened in '87 that really took a bit of a plunge. And, I think a lot of the ups and downs on my chart are equaled out by heights of greatness. And '88 is a really good year. Project A-Ko happened, Die Hard. Even though Die Hard, I kind of consider it the first of a line of the sort of, there's a duality of gangster movies. They make some movies where it's all black guys with their hoods on and they're being oppressed, and then there's this other kind of like gangster thug movie where there's white cops but they never wear a uniform. Like Clint Eastwood and like Dirty Harry. Where's your uniform, Clint? Anyway. What else happened in, I should mention some stuff in '89. It's like the UHF movie. Dolph Lundgren was in Punisher. There's one of your first great Marvel movies. We won't talk about Marvel, or not much anyway. There's some great movies. Mark Hamill tried to have a comeback in this movie called Slipstream, where there's a whole bunch of airplanes flying around the planet. There's also a movie, Robot Jocks. The Last Crusade is in there. I think Star Trek The Final Frontier is probably my, Star Trek 5, maybe my favorite Star Trek movie. At least sometimes it is. I like the wackiness of that. And Batman came out that year. Anyways, so you see this sort of hike in creativity and this explosion of great movie making. And then after that, you get a lot of sequels. You get like Back to the Future 3 and RoboCop 2, Die Hard 2. You get a lot of these sort of sequels. And as you get into the 90s, there is some great movies in the 90s, even if it's like Highlander 2, which I really like. I may have skipped over, what year was Highlander? That was, let me look for that one in my list. Come on, I know you're in my list. I have to scroll up through my list. Maybe it's not important to find it. But I think it was 85, wasn't it? 84, 85 Highlander? 86, yeah. Highlander was 86. But anyways, I'm saying you get into the 90s and there's still some really good movies happening, like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Army of Darkness, and you certainly get a lot more degeneracy and people just blowing each other away, and Leon the Professional in '94, Frankenstein. In the Mouth of Madness is definitely one of my favorite movies, but not a fun movie, not a movie for kids. I don't know what to say, but I tried to understand why it was that 1996 just didn't even blip on my list. And my best theory is that this is basically when Nickelodeon came along. And I don't know if you want me to talk about Nickelodeon, the den of evil, but I kind of see it as a sort of sign of the death of Hollywood. Somewhere in the 90s, the people in Hollywood, it was either because they just were making so much money that they didn't care. A lot of your writers weren't thinking about the grandeur of the story. They were just bashing out stories. Everybody's just knocking each other down with back talking, just rude dialogue, childish dialogue, and like I say, I don't want to talk about the 2000s, but there's nothing in the 2000s that I consider great. You know, like you could say, well, what about the Marvel movie? Yeah, the Marvel movies were full of politics. I've talked about this, and you know what? There was a Captain America movie in the 90s. I mean, did you know that? Like, you know, even Jurassic Park is in the 90s. It's pretty good, but you get into the 2000s and you can't even watch these new Jurassic Park movies. They're terrible. You know, they're nonsense. And some of the last great movies that show up in the 90s, like The Big Lebowski, is pretty good, but it's not great. You know, and it's like, why do I like that movie? Because Jeff Bridges is in it. And it's like, if you were to talk about Tron or whatever, I'm not talking about why I like Tron because Jeff Bridges is in it. I'm talking about Tron because it's an awesome movie that has Jeff Bridges in it. You know what I'm saying? Taking this off. But, if anyone wanted to make some comment on what they think about why this chart looks like this and why did Hollywood go through these stages of growth and then sort of crumble. Like I said, there's this great dip at 87, right when the Masters of the Universe movie came out. And I've always felt that if you did a really, really good He-Man movie, a really good Transformers movie, that would have been like the greatest thing. That would have been the peak. But for some reason, Hollywood, Hellyweird, they just dropped the ball. And, they were on a climb, and then they just went, pew, like this, and I don't know why. I don't know why. Would you assume that Hollywood should be continuing to make better and better movies, or that there should just be a sort of straight graph of just constant fun and joy for everybody, or is there just a limit to what you can do with mythos? What do you think? Like, you'll never get another like great Star Trek movie. It won't happen. It's done. Like you won't get any great movies ever again. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Are you ever going to capture that again? Like that was a moment. It wasn't just like a really great movie. It was something that had heart, and it had something that you just don't see in movies anymore because of all the control and management going through. It just doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like 1989, there was a movie with Bruce Campbell and Walter Cohane, Moontrap. Great movie. They recreated the moon landing. They did a better job than Disney. I'm putting the crown back on. So you take me seriously. I think I'm right about this chart, and I think I'm right that human beings have only succeeded so far in a lot of ways, like the ability to build, architecture and engineering, and the ability to, map out the planet. We've been just about everywhere. We haven't been all the way under the water in submarines everywhere. We haven't looked out for every ancient structure. You could be walking on artifacts right now under the ground that are buried from the great floods of thousands of years ago. Who knows? But what I'm saying is, when it comes to mythos, okay, and I've said this before, mythos at its best empowers and strengthens ethos. Okay? And I don't know where we should be going, other than to say that really good storytelling, if it's only good for so much, if there's like the greatest stories ever and that's it, and you just can't keep up something like Hollywood, and not just because of money, and not just because of like crazy guys that get hopped up on coke and whatever, and they're driving around in Lamborghinis or whatever it was that people idealize. You know, I mean, I've got a lot of movies in here like Muppet movies, like Jim Henson stuff. They belong in there. I don't really watch them anymore, but when I was a kid, they were really great movies. You know, even Disney. I mean, I could just throttle my anger at Disney these days, but you know, there was some great movies from Disney back in the day. You know, and it's like, is that all there is? You know, is there is there room for anything great? And you know, right now, Hollywood is basically shut down. They're just a propaganda machine that doesn't even know what to do with themselves. And they're massively censoring the internet right now. And it's like, I would just want to make an intelligent rant. And it's like, I'm just going to get shadow banned and blocked everywhere because I'm being intelligent. They're just going to send all their bots after me. It's like, I'm trying to help. And it's like I'm sitting on my storyboards of the movies that I think are the greatest movies that would ever get made, and they're not getting made. And it's like, why? You know, did I do something wrong? Because I haven't had any decent criticism of my storyboards from anybody. Waiting for some critical response, some good engagement from people. Whatever. uh, what can I say? Here's to you, internet. Mm. Oh yeah. Before I forget, I want to get into the plaid army. Don't ask me why. It's one of my goals. So I'm going to do my magic trick here. I always wear my pink shirt because Prince Adam wears a pink shirt before he turns into He-Man, and I'm always ready to turn into He-Man. You know what I'm saying? But I'm going to do my magic trick. See if this works. So I don't know how else to end this. Like, I feel there's something really, really important to say, that, you know, mythology and storytelling is important. It's important to me. The real world is important, and what drives you in the real world is also like something that needs to be refined. You know, I've said this about religions. Religions are basically mythos, and a lot of them are controlled by very, very corrupt people. You know, guys with funny hats on. And you know what we need is we need the Temple of Man. We need to bring back the Temple of Man, the great competition to all institutions. Because if we're ever going to have the best movies ever made, if we're ever going to have the best pathway in life, pathos, which is also passion or emotions, the path that you follow, you choose your way through life, and you balance pathos with logos. Logos doesn't necessarily come before pathos, but logic and reason should be guiding you as you take your path through life, or whatever. And all things in life come out of chaos, the chaos of creation, and you pursue eros. Eros with an A is kind of a word that I invented in a way. I mean, you could think of like an aeroplane. I'm talking about that aspect of what you're achieving. If eros with an E involves your pursuit of love and comfort, then eros with an A, it's your pursuit of whatever you want to call God. And I don't mean like a storytelling God. I mean your own goodness, godliness in your pursuit in life. The best that you can be, and the best that you can be for the sake of everyone else. So, I don't know. Hope that's a good message, Internet. Goodbye, Internet.